You never expect your breaking point to come from a stranger in an office where you were never meant to belong in the first place. My name's Rachel. I grew up in Rochester, New York, the kind of place where winters freeze your bones and summers smell like warm pavement and freshly cut lawns. I used to dream about becoming a teacher. I even made it halfway through my education degree before life did what it does best, got in the way. My dad passed from a stroke in my junior year, and I had to go back home to help my mom care for my younger brother, Aaron, who was born with cerebral palsy. The student loans didn't care about my sob story, neither did the rent. Fast forward to the present, or more specifically, to March 2024. After a messy breakup, downsizing and scraping the bottom of every barrel I could find, I signed up with a local temp agency. It was either that or go into foreclosure. The agency called me for a simple data entry position at a small, family-owned packaging company on the outskirts of Buffalo. I told myself it was just 6 weeks, a blip on the radar, something to get me through until I found something better. The office was small, maybe 15 people total. It sat tucked behind a rusted strip mall, like an afterthought of a business park, with that lingering smell of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. I remember thinking the people seemed friendly enough on my first day. The owner, Chuck, wore a perpetually wrinkled polo and greeted me like he was welcoming a distant cousin at a cookout. His daughter handled HR. It all felt weirdly informal, not corporate, not structured, just strange. That's when I met her. Her name was Lexie. Blonde hair, too many eyelash extensions, 22 years old, and already acting like she owned the place. She worked in client accounts and sat 2 desks away from mine. At first I thought she was just aloof, too busy texting or flipping through Instagram to notice the new girl. But by the second day, it was clear she noticed. She just didn't care. I don't know what it was about me that she zeroed in on. Maybe it was my awkwardness. Maybe it was the second-hand blazer I wore, or the way I triple-checked every spreadsheet like my life depended on it. Maybe she just needed a target. The first time she said it, I thought I misheard. That stupid temp can figure it out. She laughed to someone in the break room, sipping her iced coffee like it held her self-worth. I froze. It wasn't even subtle, and when I looked up, she didn't flinch. She wanted me to hear it. It only got worse. She would roll her eyes every time I asked a question, even when I was asking someone else. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes on my desk. Please try not to mess this up in loopy handwriting. She'd make loud, sarcastic comments when I walked into the room. Oh great. Time for round 2 of amateur hour. And when she wasn't doing that, she was whispering about me to coworkers, like it was her full-time job. It wasn't hard to hear. The place was small, and Lexie wasn't exactly subtle. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself, just get through 6 weeks. But each day chipped away at me. I started getting headaches, then stomach aches. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying her sneers in my mind. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom, not my best friend Eva. I didn't want to seem weak. But by the 3rd week the physical symptoms kicked in. I had a full-blown panic attack in the parking lot before work. My blood pressure spiked so high at a routine checkup that my doctor gave me a prescription and a warning. Something is affecting your health. I knew exactly what it was. But what could I do? Speak up? To who? Chuck, the man who called Lexie his bonus daughter because she used to babysit his grandkids. HR. That was his real daughter. There was no HR department, just family loyalty and a temp agency that could replace me with a phone call. I couldn't afford to quit. I couldn't afford to get fired. So I stayed. I smiled. I did my work, and I took it. Every snide comment, every exaggerated sigh when I walked by, every thrown middle finger when no one else was looking. I cried in the bathroom during lunch. I ate in my car just to be away from her. I started feeling like I was going crazy, like maybe I was stupid, maybe I was annoying, maybe I deserved this. But something inside me, some old, buried part of me, didn't believe that. I wasn't raised to take abuse. My father taught me better than that. He used to say, you don't have to win every fight, but you sure as hell don't let anyone walk all over you. He'd worked as a union rep for 30 years. He believed in fairness, in standing up, and even though he was gone, I felt his voice somewhere deep inside. So I started watching, listening, taking notes. Not because I planned revenge, not yet, but because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining it. She called a client a mouth breather during a call on March 19th. She left early 3 days in a row and logged full hours. She joked about fudging numbers on an invoice. She shared someone's salary aloud in the break room. It wasn't just me. She was toxic all around, but in that charming, manipulative way some people weaponize. And because she was young, cute and close to the family, she got away with it. I started writing everything down in a Google Doc, saving screenshots of anything I could. I even left my phone recording during a few of her louder tirades, just in case. I felt like a secret agent in a very sad, low-budget spy movie. I told myself, just survive until your last day. But deep down something was shifting in me. The more I watched Lexie treat people like stepping stones and punchlines, the more I realized I couldn't just walk away. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a saint. But I wasn't going to let her do to the next temp what she did to me. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew it would be careful, legal, and devastating, and no one would ever trace it back to me. I've always been a slow burn kind of person, not the type to yell, slam doors, or explode in the heat of the moment. No, I internalize. I ruminate. I let the hurt simmer and spiral until it becomes something else entirely. A quiet determination to never let it happen again. The breaking point didn't come as a grand event. No shouting match, no final straw moment like you see in movies. It came on a rainy Thursday morning, 5 days before my contract was set to end. I had slept poorly the night before, one of those restless half-sleeps where you keep waking up in a panic, heart racing for no apparent reason. I dreamt I was back in college, sitting in front of a professor who kept laughing every time I opened my mouth. I woke up with my jaw clenched so tight, my molars ached. I got to the office early as usual. I liked having a moment to breathe before the chaos began. The hum of fluorescent lights, the soft whir of old computers booting up, it gave me a strange sense of control. I sat at my desk, sipping coffee from my chipped travel mug, reviewing invoices, pretending I was somewhere else. Then Lexie walked in. She wore a neon green hoodie with the name of some overpriced athleisure brand splashed across the front and immediately launched into one of her morning tirades. She was on the phone with someone, probably a friend, and she wasn't exactly whispering. Yeah, I swear to God I'm losing brain cells working with this temp. Like I ask her to fix one spreadsheet and she gives me a whole lecture about best practices. Bitch, this isn't Google. This is a packaging company. Who even cares? I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Just stared at my monitor. Like maybe if I didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't register. But then she turned to her desk, the one close enough for me to hear every word she said under her breath, and muttered, God, I can't wait for her to be gone. Total charity case. Like, no offense, but I don't want someone's broke-arm midlife crisis ruining my job. That one landed hard. I felt my throat tighten. My hands started shaking, just slightly, just enough for me to grip the edge of my desk. I bit the inside of my cheek and focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't cry. Not here. Not in front of her. But something inside me cracked open. It wasn't just the cruelty of it. It was the fact that she knew I needed this job, knew I was struggling, knew I couldn't afford to push back. And instead of offering even the most basic decency, she weaponized it, turned my survival into her personal joke. That was the moment I knew, really knew, that I couldn't just walk away. Lexie wasn't just mean, she was calculated. She'd likely done this before and she'd do it again. And people let her, because it was easier to stay out of her path than to call her out. She was protected, she had proximity to the owners. She was young and pretty and had mastered that sugary tone that made older men feel clever. But I had something she didn't: perspective and receipt. That night, after I got home, I poured a glass of cheap wine and opened the Google Doc I'd been quietly building. I called it Lexie Logs. Like a bad sitcom. It had dates, timestamps, quotes, screenshots, descriptions of things she'd said or done, some of it petty, sure, but some of it serious. Violations, breaches of trust, stuff that could actually matter if someone had the courage or the distance to act on. That night, I stayed up until 2 a.m. organizing everything, cross-referencing dates, pulling out specifics, matching quotes to potential audio clips. I felt like a detective in my own damn life. It was the first time in weeks I felt something close to control. I still hadn't figured out what I was going to do with it. Revenge is a tricky thing. You think you want it until you're staring it in the face, wondering if you're just becoming the same monster in different clothing. But then again, I wasn't interested in slashing tires or sending anonymous hate mail. I didn't want to hurt her. I wanted her seen. I wanted anyone to realize that her shiny exterior hid a rot that was poisoning everything it touched. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to watch it all collapse around her. Friday came, then Monday. Each day, I grew quieter, more observant. I barely spoke unless I had to. Lexie in turn became more brazen, like she could sense the countdown, like she wanted to twist the knife before I walked out for good. She flipped me off again, this time in the middle of a staff meeting, when the manager stepped out for a call, just looked right at me, held up her hand, smirked. I glanced around. No one saw, or no one wanted to see. On Tuesday she loudly claimed I misfiled client info, which I hadn't. I proved it in 3 clicks. She rolled her eyes, muttered something about temps always being defensive. That night, I made my decision. I wasn't going to report her to the company. That wouldn't go anywhere. HR was her best friend. Chuck adored her. I'd just be the angry temp they barely remembered a week later. No, I needed distance. I needed detachment. I needed deniability. I reached out to a journalist friend I knew from college, Elena. We'd taken creative writing classes together, lost touch after school, reconnected through Facebook during the early pandemic when everyone was doom-scrolling and low. Elena worked for a regional business ethics blog, one of those places that covered local corruption, shady HR practices, corporate gossip. She once published a piece about a CEO running a dating scam in his own office. She had reach, and more importantly she had confidence. I didn't tell her everything, just said I had documentation about a young employee in a family-owned business behaving unethically, creating a toxic work environment, misusing client data, and getting away with it because of nepotism. Her response: "I'm listening." I used a burner email, sent the doc, left out names, but gave enough clues that if she did some digging, especially with the client comments Lexie had made, she'd be able to verify it. I told her I didn't want anything traced back to me, no quotes, no mentions. I was gone from the company anyway. She agreed. 2 days passed, then 3. I assumed she dropped it, or it wasn't juicy enough, or she couldn't prove anything. But then Friday rolled around, my last day. I walked in to find a weird hush over the office. Chuck wasn't in his usual spot. His daughter was whispering to another manager. Lexie sat at her desk, pale and quiet for once. Something was off. Just before lunch I heard it. Elena Bryant just called about a story she's working on. Someone whispered behind me. Apparently she got an anonymous tip about someone here leaking client info. Lexie stormed out of the office 20 minutes later, slammed her laptop shut, threw a file, said something about people trying to ruin her career. Chuck's daughter chased after her, red-faced. I sat at my desk, didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even breathe for a sec. I just watched, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I felt calm. I didn't know what Elena would do with the information. I didn't care. I was gone after today. This wasn't about watching Lexie fall. It was about making sure anyone finally held her accountable. My last task that day was shredding some old files. Lexie's name was on most of them. Sloppy, rushed entries, mistakes I'd had to fix behind the scenes for weeks. I fed them into the shredder one by one, like closing a chapter. By 5 p.m. I clocked out, handed in my badge, walked to my car in the fading sunlight. I expected to cry, or feel something huge, but all I felt was quiet, the kind that comes after a long, brutal storm. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I wasn't the same person who walked into that office 6 weeks ago, and I sure as hell wasn't afraid of people like Lexie anymore. The weekend after I left that office felt like waking up after surgery. I was groggy, slow, unsure if the pain was gone or just numb. I kept expecting to feel triumphant, like I'd just completed some great mission, but instead I just felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones, the kind that sleep can't fix. Saturday morning, I slept until 11 for the first time in months. No alarms, no fake smiles to wear, no gut punch anxiety pulling me out of bed, just silence. But by Sunday night, the anxiety crept back in. My thoughts kept circling. What if she finds out? What if someone connects the dots? What if Elena includes something that gives me away? I reread every line of the document I'd sent. I'd removed names, edited timestamps, scrubbed the metadata. Still doubt lingered. I wasn't a professional at this. I was just a tired woman who'd been backed into a corner for too long. Monday came. Then Tuesday. I waited. I refreshed Elena's site like it was gospel. Every hour. Nothing. Then, on Wednesday morning, I got a text from Eva, my best friend since high school. We hadn't talked in over a week. Not since I'd shut myself off to survive the last few days at the company. Her message was simple. "Did you see this?" She'd sent a screenshot. It was a headline. Sources reveal toxic culture, nepotism, and ethical violations at local packaging firm. By Elena Bryant, Northline Weekly. My heart punched my ribs as I clicked the link. There it was. A long detailed piece outlining a whistleblower tip about employee L.
a young woman closely tied to management, accused of inappropriate conduct, unprofessional behavior, and manipulation of client accounts. The article didn't name Lexie, but anyone who worked there would know. Elena had done her homework. She'd spoken with 2 former clients who recalled interactions with a rude, unprofessional account manager. One admitted they'd quietly pulled their contract after an uncomfortable phone exchange. The story highlighted the family-run structure of the company, the lack of checks and balances, and the broader issue of toxic employees being protected because of personal connections. It was brutal, and it was real. I sat on my couch, clutching my mug of tea, rereading the article over and over like it might vanish. I was shaking, not from fear but from release. For weeks, my body had carried this tension like a disease, and now, here it was, exposed. The comments section exploded. Local readers chimed in with their own stories about nepotism and office bullying. Some even guessed the company. Sounds like Northern Rapco, one comment read. Had a terrible experience with a client rep there who thought she was untouchable. Guess she was. Lexie's name didn't show up, neither did mine. But by noon I got a DM on LinkedIn. It was from Dylan, one of the quieter guys in the office. Someone who always looked vaguely uncomfortable whenever Lexie went on one of her rants. Hey, just wanted to say I read that article, and if you had anything to do with it, good for you. I wish I'd said something when you were there. I'm sorry I didn't. You didn't deserve any of that. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't respond, but I cried. Not the loud dramatic sobbing I'd done in my car during those awful lunch breaks. This was quiet, exhausted crying, like my body was finally letting go of something I'd carried for too long. By Thursday, I heard through a former coworker, someone I'd connected with briefly over shared eye rolls, that Lexie had been put on leave. Unofficially, it sounded like she was asked to step away until things cooled down. Chuck apparently lost a major client because of the article. His daughter was scrambling to do damage control. Rumors were flying. Some staff were whispering about how Lexie's behavior had always made them uncomfortable. Others acted shocked, like they'd had no idea. That part burned more than I expected, because they had known. They'd seen the eye rolls, heard the snide remarks, laughed along when it was safer than challenging her. But now that it was public, now that it might affect them, suddenly everyone was a victim too. I wanted to scream, but what was the point? I reminded myself, this wasn't about them. This wasn't even about Lexie anymore. This was about me, about reclaiming my voice in a place that had tried to silence it. But the fallout wasn't just external. Something shifted inside me too. For weeks, I had internalized everything, told myself I wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't worth defending. I'd felt invisible, just another temp, another filler body to plug a hole until someone more permanent came along. But now, I felt visible, not in the famous kind of way, not even publicly, just, to myself. I'd stood up, I'd acted, I'd made something happen. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but effectively, and no one could take that from me. Still, the fear didn't vanish overnight. For days I flinched every time my phone buzzed. I avoided checking my email. I imagined lawsuits, threats, angry phone calls from Chuck or his daughter, but nothing came. I was just a temp. In the end, no one ever noticed the By the following week, I started interviewing for new positions. This time I had boundaries. I asked about office culture, team dynamics, how conflict was handled. I wasn't going to walk into another nightmare with my eyes closed. One afternoon while updating my resume, I paused at the section where I'd listed the packaging job. I hovered over it for a moment, then deleted it. It didn't belong there. It wasn't part of my story anymore. At least, not the kind of story I wanted to tell professionally, but personally. That place changed me. Lexie changed me, not because she broke me, but because in trying to, she forced me to finally remember who I was.
It's strange how life's toughest moments sometimes become the catalyst for the most unexpected transformations. When I look back now, that brutal few weeks at the packaging company weren't just a nightmare, they were the crucible where I began to forge a new version of myself, the one who could stand her ground, who could reclaim her dignity, and who finally understood that power isn't just about winning fights, it's about choosing which battles you fight, and how. After Lexie's public fall from grace, the immediate storm settled quickly. She never returned to the office. Word on the street was that she'd landed a position somewhere else, but the scandal followed her. The company continued struggling, losing clients and trust, and Chuck's family quietly started restructuring the business to keep it afloat. I stayed out of it, watching from a distance, grateful to have closed that chapter, but the real work was happening inside me. I found myself waking up each day with a little more energy, a little more clarity, I started journaling again, something I'd stopped doing during the worst of those 6 weeks. Writing helped me untangle the mess in my head, the tangled feelings of shame, anger, sadness, and hope. One morning, as I sipped coffee in my tiny apartment in Rochester, I wrote down a simple truth that surprised me. I am not a victim, not anymore. That realization was the pivot. It didn't erase the pain or the scars, but it changed my relationship to them. I stopped replaying every insult, every sneer. I stopped asking myself why I wasn't stronger or smarter. Instead, I started asking what I wanted next. And that's when the idea came to me, not revenge in the petty sense, but reclaiming control in a way that was smart, legal, and deeply personal. I had learned a lot from watching Lexie, how her connections protected her, how charm and manipulation worked in closed systems. I decided to take those lessons and use them differently. I went back to school part-time, online, to finish my degree in business ethics. It was slow going, balancing work and school, but I was fueled by a fire that had been smoldering for years. I wanted to understand how companies operated, how toxic cultures thrived, and how to fight them from the inside. Around the same time, I started volunteering with a local non-profit that supported workers facing harassment and discrimination. Listening to those stories, raw, painful, often ignored, reminded me I wasn't alone, that the system was broken in many ways, but change was possible if enough people spoke up. And then came the unexpected. One day, out of the blue, I received an email from Elena, the journalist friend I'd confided in. She told me that after her expose, a wave of tips had poured in about other workplaces, other toxic employees hiding behind family ties and nepotism. Her blog had gained attention from regional press and advocacy groups. She asked if I wanted to collaborate on a larger project, a podcast series exploring workplace bullying and corporate cover-ups, told through the eyes of whistleblowers. I hesitated. Sharing my story publicly, the thought terrified me. But then I thought about all the times I had felt powerless, unseen, unheard. Maybe this was my chance to be heard in a way that mattered. I agreed. Recording the first episode was harder than I expected. Speaking out loud, recounting my experiences, dredging up those memories, it made my voice shake. But with each session, I grew steadier. I felt my old self returning, tempered and stronger. The podcast gained traction. Listeners sent messages, thanking me for shining a light on shadows they'd lived in too. The support felt like a balm. Meanwhile, my professional life began to shift. I landed a full-time position at a mid-sized non-profit focused on labor rights. The culture was open, supportive, and yes, imperfect, but it was a place where I could grow, advocate, and be valued for who I was. I still think about Lexie sometimes, not with hatred. That energy is exhausting, but with a kind of detached understanding. She was young, flawed, and trapped in a system that rewarded cruelty and silence. I pity her more than anything, but I'm glad I never let her define me. My revenge wasn't a calculated trap or a scandalous expose that ruined her life. It was the quiet reclaiming of my own story, my own power. I'm not naive. I know workplaces like that still exist. I know toxic people still roam the halls, protected by connections and fear. But I also know that courage, when fueled by strategy and support, can break through even the thickest wall. And sometimes the best revenge is simply this: surviving, growing, thriving. That's the story I want to tell now. Looking back, I realize how much power we give away when we believe that our suffering is permanent, that the nightmare will define us forever. For a long time, I thought that 6-week temp job was just a chapter of misery I had to survive, but it turned out to be so much more than that. I remember the day I walked into that small office behind a rusted strip mall, like it was yesterday. The cold fluorescent lights, the stale coffee smell, the hum of printers. It all felt like stepping into a world that was too small for the storm inside me. And Lexie, she wasn't just a coworker. She was the personification of everything I feared: cruelty dressed up in entitlement, a reminder that some people get to wield power without consequence, while others are just barely holding on. But what I've learned since then is this: power doesn't only come from positions or connections or the ability to hurt. It also comes from quiet resilience, from the choices we make when no one is watching, from the decisions to stand up, to speak out, and even to walk away on our own terms. The podcast I did with Elena opened doors I didn't know existed. Suddenly, my voice mattered, not just as a victim or a bystander, but as a storyteller and an advocate. Every email, every message from listeners who'd endured similar pain reminded me that the problem wasn't me, it was the system, the culture of silence and fear that protects people like Lexie. And that realization was liberating, because it meant I wasn't alone, because it meant change was possible. One afternoon, a year after I left that office, I got a message on LinkedIn that surprised me. It was from a former colleague, Dylan, the quiet guy who'd finally said something supportive back then. He told me Lexie had been fired from her new job after similar complaints piled up, that she'd started therapy, maybe, and was trying to change. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was. I don't wish her harm. I don't need her downfall to feel whole. I just needed to find my own way out of the dark. And I did. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did, if stirring the pot anonymously was worth it. The answer isn't simple. I regret the pain, the nights I felt so small I wondered if I'd disappear, but I don't regret reclaiming my story no matter how messy it got. I don't regret choosing to fight back in the only way I could, because at the end of the day, revenge isn't about breaking someone else, it's about rebuilding yourself. So here I am, sitting in a sunny cafe downtown typing these words on a laptop that I bought with my own paycheck from a job where I'm respected. My past isn't erased, but it's no longer a chain, it's a foundation. And that to me is victory.